Hello? Can anyone hear me? Mitchell. Hey, Heather.
Hey, Chris.
How are you?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. You're going to be my rescue guy?
I'll be your moderator. I'll watch the chat and handle it and all that. I don't know how much I'll rescue you, but I'll be there to help.
As long as I got somebody else with me. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh, I'm there. You'll do fine, man. But I always remember is no one else knows how to do this stuff. So anything that you just BS, they don't know it. So
Yeah, that's true.
you got it, man.
That's very true.
You got it.
Cool. So I haven't used Zoom before for this type of thing. I was using GoToMeeting,
Yeah.
but it seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's straightforward. I haven't noticed any glitches and anything like that. And yeah, I'll drop that JotForm link in the chat once you start talking about it so they can see it in there. And then I'll just answer questions. We've just had normal issues where people said, I can't do the poll and all that. And then on chat, I just reassure them and say, hey, give us your input here. We know you're on the call, and it'll go smooth, man. For
Okay,
sure.
great.
Yeah.
That sounds good. And then when I start the broadcast, you'll be able to speak if needed, right?
Yeah, I'll mute myself. I'll stop my video, but if you need me, then, or if I notice there's an issue, I'll just hop in and interrupt you. Like if I've lost video feed of you or something like that.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. We do have some storms out here in
Okay.
Texas right now. So if that becomes an issue, I'll pass it to you. You have a copy of the PowerPoint, right?
I will pull it up right now out of Dropbox. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, no
Because that would
problem.
be good. You should go ahead and make me a co-host so
Okay.
so if you just click on participants
Got it.
and then you see me and hit more and make me a co-host, that way if you drop off, I can take over. Because otherwise I can't take over. We'll lose the whole feed.
Got it. So
And then
you
if
should be a co-host now.
okay, yep, it says I'm a co-host. And then the only thing you might want to do is if you change your name, you're coming up as Doug Davis. That's not really a big deal because they know you're not Doug Davis.
Yeah.
You're a lot better looking than Doug Davis.
Oh, thank you.
All right, but yeah, man. Yeah, once you hit broadcast, they'll see you. So you're about at that time. I'm going to go ahead and I'll mute me and stop my video and get ready to roll.
All right. That sounds good. I'm just trying to see. When I hit share my screen, huh. Oh, you're muted. All right. Hold on, Mitchell.
Yeah, they won't be able to get into the room until you hit broadcast. So you might want to hit broadcast now and start talking to them while you see people
Okay.
start launching in.
Hey, everybody. This is Chris Klein with First Team. Thank you for jumping on to our CE training, our web CE training today on electronics restoration and whether to restore or replace. We're excited to have you and excited for the training that we have today. We have about 50, almost 50 people on, and we've got a little over 150 registered. So we're going to allow for another minute or so for people to get into the virtual room here, and then we'll get things going. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. A little disclaimer, I'm based in Austin, Texas, so we've got some thunderstorms rolling through. So if for whatever reason my connection goes out, we do have a plan B. Always good to have a plan B, and that'll be Mitchell Rogers, who is one of our co-hosts. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'll get to the introductions in just a moment. Looks like we're up to about 84, 85 attendees. So let me just get the screen set up here. Okay. Looking good. I'm working on a split screen here, which is why I'm looking off to the side. We've got about 90 participants on now, so more people just are piling in here. So again, we'll allow for just another minute or so, and then we'll get things kicked off. Oh, looks like we've got Frank. Frank Lebrano's on. Thank you for jumping on, Frank.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay, excellent. Good to have you, Frank. So it is 11:02 a.m. Central Time. We've got 103 people on. So I think that's good. We'll get things kicked off from here. Again, my name is Chris Klein, and I'm with First Team, and we're here today to present a virtual CE training on electronics restoration, specifically reducing electronics claim costs. It's a 1-hour CE. So with that, in order to be by the book as it relates to the CE Credentialing Bureau, we run this training they give us a little buffer, but typically about between 50 minutes to 1 hour. So we will do our best to be right in that zone somewhere. Everyone should have received a link for it's called a JOT form, and that's going to allow everybody to get credit. Let's be honest here. We're here for 2 reasons. Probably number 1, to get credit, and then number 2, obviously, is to get an education that will, our objective today is to have everybody walk away a little bit wiser and smarter as it relates to electronics restoration. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce the panel. So with us, we have Doug Davis. He has 16 years in the business, and he is our resident trainer here at First Team, creates all of the wonderful education resources, including the one today that you're going to see. With me as well is Mitchell Rogers, and he is a multi-location First Team operator based out of beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida, 4th generation dry cleaner, and also a certified CE instructor for 9 different courses. Something I want to mention about Mitchell, he's our rescue guy today. So if for whatever reason, if you're like me, where again, we've got some storms coming through out here, and if you have any connection issues or something is going wrong from a technical standpoint, or really you have any comments, questions, or feedback, and you can't use the chat feature on Zoom, please be sure to write down Mitchell's numbers. So I'm going to read that twice to you. It's area code 727-423-0614. Again, that's 727-423-0614. And Mitchell, again, is in addition to having his cell phone, please also use that chat feature on the Zoom toolbar there as well. Mitchell's going to be monitoring that so that we make sure that we don't miss any of your questions or comments. And then Mitchell, because I'm going to be running the training here, please let me know if anything comes either to your cell phone or through the chat feature. So with us as well is Steve Quiring. He is my peer, my counterpart here at First Team, 12 years experience, also a certified CE instructor and national trainer here at First Team, and then yours truly, 15 years experience, national account manager here at First Team, and obviously a certified CE instructor. So let's go ahead and do just a little bit more housekeeping before we dive right into the fun here. Again, as far as getting the credit that you came here to get today, you've got to be registered individually. So what this means is that we can't have a group of people huddled around a computer and then have all those people get credit. The CE Credentialing Bureau needs to be able to monitor attendance by individual email address. So just make sure that you are individually registered and in front of your own computer. That way you can be assured that you'll be eligible to receive credit that way. So dialing in and listening only is not an option. You need to have access to the visual. Again, you all received that registration link, so that should be all you need to be able to participate in the visual portion of this meeting. Very, very important. One of the ways that the CE Credentialing Bureau ensures that people are not only present but paying attention is at 2 undisclosed intervals in the training. You're going to hear silence from me, and when you hear that, that's a clue that there's a code on the screen. You've got to write that down, because there's going to be on your the registration form that you fill out. Again, that link is coming, but on that form there's a place to enter in these 2 secret codes that are going to pop up on the screen at some point throughout the training here. So make sure that you listen for that silence, write down those codes when they're up on the screen. We're not able to share them after the fact. As far as credit, today we're offering credit in Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, North Carolina, and Delaware. And as far as the remote acknowledgement form, just something very, very important is that we need to have that turned in within 5 days of today's training. So look for it. When you get that link, it's going to take you to, we use JotForms in order to do this. So it's going to look something like what you have up on the screen here. So again, just keep in mind when you click that, you'll register, you'll fill out that virtual form there, and you can see it has all of the necessary information as far as your license and then the secret codes. Just submit it within 5 days and you'll be good to go. You'll know that you're good to go because you'll get a thank you once you've successfully filled out that form. So last thing before we dive right into the training here, again, just remember to use that chat feature, which is up on the toolbar. So if for some reason you can see me, but you can't hear me, or really if you have any question at all, it doesn't have to be a technical issue, put it into the chat section. Mitchell will be monitoring that. And then that way we can be assured to answer all questions, whether we do it at the end of the training or depending on the volume of questions, sometimes we'll do it as a follow-up after the fact. So with that, let's talk about what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to talk about what items can be restored. Second, we're going to talk about why you would even consider restoring electronics. The third, we're going to talk about damage and the different types of cleaning options that a qualified electronics restoration specialist is going to employ. We're also going to talk about data recovery and lightning strikes, which is a big one. So again, lots of different ways to learn something new today. And then again, that last piece will be that chat component here. Again, time permitting, we're going to, one way or another, we'll be sure to get to all of your questions. So let's talk first about that first item and the items that can be restored. So you can see here, it's not just computers and laptops, but it's also things like data recovery, musical instruments, entertainment centers, video game consoles, household appliances. As we think about these items, think about it in your own life, and that'll be a reoccurring theme today. The more relatable you can make this to a policyholder by thinking about how this might impact you if, God forbid, you had your own loss, the more effective you'll be at reaching that understanding with the policyholder. So for many different reasons and in many different ways, these items can be extremely important. And restoration can be not just a good option, but the best option for not just cost containment, but for service as well. A qualified electronics restoration specialist will also have the ability to restore commercial electronics equipment. And whether it be for personal lines or commercial lines, a good way to think about any of these items is, does it plug into a wall? Does it have any kind of microchip? And if the answer is yes to either one of those, it could be a candidate for electronics restoration. Obviously, on commercial claims, the big thing is minimizing business interruption. So that's something that we focus on, and that's something that makes commercial kind of unique. But regardless of the need, we're going to talk about why it makes sense to engage an expert so that you're always doing what's best to close that claim quickly, pay what's owed, not a penny more or less, and provide great customer service. So let's look for a moment at what we spend our money on. And the number one category is clothing. Americans spend $312 billion every year on clothing, but that's followed a very close second by electronics. So the interesting thing about these two categories is that clothing tends to be the most complicated category because it's an almost endless variety of makes and brands and styles as it relates to the clothing that people buy and wear. So that makes that category definitely the most complex and complicated. Thankfully, you've got plenty of great resources out there to help you make sense of that. But again, followed a close number two is electronics, and that's really not too far behind what Americans spend their money on. And the interesting thing about electronics is it is the fastest growing category and the fastest growing by far. And when you look at what we spend our money on compared to other categories, again, electronics dwarfs automobiles, personal care products, tobacco, travel, sporting goods, toys, jewelry, and watches, larger than all of those categories combined. If you look at it by category, electronics represents about 19% of your spend on average. Again, textiles being the largest, but the way that these two parts of the claim are handled can have a huge impact on customer service and cost containment. And really, again, aside from just getting some credit, that's what we're here to learn about, is how can we achieve those two things? And obviously, as it relates to today's training, restoration is one of the ways that will get you there in the most effective manner. So let's talk about electronics. And again, as it relates to this section of the training, it's why we would even consider it in the first place. And it happens to be, as we mentioned before, the fastest growing category. So on average, Americans purchase almost $2,500 worth of electronics every year. And if you add it in year over year, this can equate to a good amount of money. And each home has about 24 electronic items per household. So the accumulation is something that, unlike big ticket items, your car, and other things that you spend a whole lot of money in one shot, this, like other contents categories, tends to kind of creep up on you. So a policyholder may not even realize all the monetary value of electronics that they have in their home, but it really, really does add up. Plus, we have more recent circumstances, and in the past month, just as last month alone, over half of employed Americans have transitioned to working from home. And I'm sure a lot of the folks out there on today's training can relate to this. We've all become very accustomed with Zoom meetings and webcams and virtual employment, which is wonderful, but it requires a lot of technology in order to do that. So in a strange twist, this is almost where the lines of personal lines and commercial lines can be kind of blended, because if your insured has a loss, making sure that they have all of the electronics back so that they can continue to do their job is very important. And I don't know how many of you have tried to shop for things like webcams recently, but there is such high demand for new electronics right now. It's not like you can get everything within 48-hour prime shipping. So that's something else to consider. And again, it's not just the money, it's the service as well, and all focused on the objective of making an insured whole again and minimizing the disruption to their life. So in other words, if they don't have their computer, their printer, and their camera systems, they might have a hard time working. So we're going to do something now that's one of the things that the Credentialing Bureau uses to make sure everybody is paying attention and attentive. We're going to launch a poll question here. So just bear with me as I get this launched. Okay. And I'm going to allow my panelists to vote on this as well. So let's go ahead. If I did this correctly, you should have a poll up on your screen. So please select the correct answer here. So how many electronic items does the American insured have? 14, 24, or 34? And it looks like we're getting lots and lots of answers in there. And I'm going to allow this to be up. This is great. I really appreciate you, everybody voting here. Mitchell, again, I'm going to rely on you to watch for any questions that come through on chat. But we already have 93 people have voted so far, so thank you. And it looks like many, many of you have the correct answers. So thank you for being attentive and for paying attention there. I'm going to allow this to go up for another 8 seconds, and we'll close it at the 1 minute mark in 3, 2, 1. So let's end polling, and I'm going to share these results again. I hope I did this correctly, but you should be able to see the results on your screen, and 78% of you got it correct. The average amount of electronic items that the average American purchases every single year and has in their home is roughly 24. So that's a good turnout. We had almost everybody vote on that, and most of you had the correct answer. So I'm going to stop sharing results here, and we will move on. Okay. Excellent. Now we're going to get to our second topic, and we're going to talk about why you should even restore electronics. So let's just take an individual item here. So we have a television. What was it purchased for? Well, maybe something like this was purchased for around $500. Maybe restoration is somewhere in the ballpark of $150. So this is where, on an individual level, would it make financial sense to restore this if it was a candidate for restoration? Let's say it passed testing and it can be restored. Yeah, that might make a whole lot of sense, because certainly the numbers would prove that it would be more cost effective to restore than to replace. And the way the vast majority of policies are written is that policyholders have that obligation to seek restoration as a means of settling their loss first before you just open up the checkbook. And in this case, it would be a difference of about $350. But let's play devil's advocate here. Maybe in this case, they really, really just want to buy a new television. And maybe that would be the right thing to do here. So maybe instead of restoring it for $150, you just give them a cash settlement for $150. So now if they want to buy that new television, they only have to come out of pocket, well, $350. But the thinking here and the messaging is, it really isn't so much about that one item. It's really becomes much more of an issue and a completely different story when we talk about your average insured, which is not like the old days. Your average insured has a television in just about every single room, and those are just the TVs. So if you have to dip into your pocket $350, let's just use that as a placeholder, every single time, then the whole idea of being made whole again starts to become a lot more difficult unless you have a whole lot of money in the bank. So this is all part of the communication when you're working with your insureds, is to look at that big picture and to work together to educate them, to inform them, and to engage experts that can help guide the direction of that claim. So even if you look at an individual room, so this is interesting because this is from an actual lost site that we were on not long ago. And as you look at this, you say, my gosh, there's a lot of different things going on here in these pictures. On the one hand, this policyholder, this actually happened to be the son of the policyholder, and he's into music and gaming. So that's what he has here on the left-hand side is some music equipment, and then his computer set up for some gaming. The second picture there, you can actually see, so it looks like we've got a air conditioner, and then we've got a guitar amplifier and some guitars up on the wall. And then the third picture, obviously, is the television and all the items that go along with that, and then some more musical equipment. So you wonder, what is it worth? And the reality is that these items add up really, really quickly. So in this case, a lot of the items on the left-hand side, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of dollars. As it relates to the musical equipment, the amplifier alone is almost $2,400. Then you've got your television, $749, and then your guitars. And I'll tell you right now, that guitar, it's something I know a little bit about. That happens to be an Ibanez, which is a really nice guitar. And in addition to these items being valuable, sometimes there can be sentimental value behind them. And I'm going to do something I've never done before, but I'll show you my office here. And I hope I don't mess this up for everybody, but if you can see that, that's my guitar. And when I was in high school, I was in a band, and that is a Gibson, and that's made in that was made in the factory in Tennessee. So to get an American-made guitar like that they're more expensive, but I love that guitar, and I can't buy another one. In addition to that, I have 3 kids, and well, actually, I'll do one other thing. I don't know if they're going to take to guitar or piano, and I don't really play piano, but I'm trying to learn a little bit. But the key is that I would love it if one of my 3 kids, hopefully all 3, but I'll settle for one, took a liking to music just like I do, because it's a wonderful thing. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. It's not just about the money, but there can be sentimental significance behind electronics, and sometimes we just don't think about that until we really apply it to our own life. So let's move on now to video game consoles. Again, this is something that was different when I was little. Back in the late 80s, they came out with video games. Had been around, but they really kind of broke through with the original Nintendo, which for my brother and I was just amazing. And they had cartridges that you would use, and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and a whole bunch of other neat games that we just loved and spent hours and hours playing those games. And video games, as I've learned now with my 3 kids, have evolved quite a bit. So no longer do you have the cartridge or the disc. Now you purchase a console. So that what you see on the screen there is a PS4. We happen to have an Xbox, but a good console can cost you $300, $400, $500. But the other thing that we've learned is that it's not just about the monetary value of the console itself. There's really 2 other things going on here. It's the value of the data on the hard drive. So a lot of times now you might pay more. They sell an Xbox One that has a 500 gigabyte hard drive, but then they sell an upgraded one that has a 1 terabyte hard drive, and that's to allow you to store your games on those hard drives. So what was maybe once a $500 console, if you average $50 per video game, could now be worth upwards of $1,000 plus. So from a monetary standpoint, does it make sense to restore something like that? Again, if it can be restored, the answer is quite possibly yes. In addition to that, what about just having something to keep the kids busy? Let's face it, this is not a good time in the lives of our policyholders out there. So sometimes just as you work with the policyholder to say, let's make an assessment, let's bring in some experts, let's have a conversation, you might learn that, hey, you know what, if you can get that back to my kids, let's keep them busy, let's keep them out of our hair, and let's continue working on this claim and do what needs to be done here. So you have that service component, which People in the industry will, there's a lot of different terms for it, but the emergency order is one term that you might hear out there, can be extremely valuable. So again, that's the theme again and again, is it's not just cost savings and paying what's owed, but it's providing great service. And the reality is those two things can coexist in the same space at the same time. And when we look at electronics items, the reality is that they tend to be more expensive purchases. They really do. So very rarely can we find really good quality electronic items for less than a few $100s, and sometimes maybe much, much, much more. A lot of times, if it's something like a new television for the living room, or again, maybe a new amplifier for a musician or a new computer, a policyholder might save up for quite a while to make this type of purchase. Or, let's be honest here, and I've done this before, maybe we do it on credit. I purchased my TV in the living room back in 2015, but when we did that, my wife and I went to Best Buy and we bought a nice television, and we signed up for the Best Buy credit card. Well, if we would have had a loss, let's say 6 months down the road, oh my gosh, imagine if you can't get that restored, and now I'm making payments on something I don't have anymore. It just becomes really complicated and really messy. So restoration can be a key for a number of different reasons. So the other component of that is the time. A lot of times we don't just rush out there and buy something without giving it some thought. So you also have the fact that a lot of people really give some thought as it relates to what they buy. So the whole concept here is to bring your policyholder back to pre-loss comfort levels. And in order to do that, restoration can be a fantastic way to minimize the disruption to their life. Again, they've got a TV or a computer in every single bedroom, and to be able to replace all of this can be very, very expensive. Not only that, time consuming as it relates to getting new devices, or in the case of my kids, for last Christmas, they wanted a Nintendo Switch, which is a little handheld gaming device. They don't want to share. They want their own. So they all have their own little Nintendo Switch. That was an expensive gift. It was the only thing they got. But being able to restore that, again, it just adds to the bottom line here. Not to mention personal laptops. So we have our work computers, but if you've got kids of your own and you've been through what we just went through, we were doing homeschooling. So we have the whole setup, and we're just praying that things get back to normal in the fall. But we had to do like so many parents did across the country, and do these virtual Zoom meetings with their teachers and these virtual assignments. And there's a lot of technology that goes into making that happen, and being able to restore that and get that back to them in a very short period of time can just be huge. So let's look at a little case study here. Again, we talked about what we consume. Average household has about 24 electronic items. So let's look at a particular case study here. On this loss, there were about 19. So in order to replace all 19 of those items, we're looking at a replacement cost of $11,631, but a cost to restore of $3,537. So we're looking at an indemnity reduction of $8,094, and that's significant. And certainly if it's a case where you have maybe a renter's policy or any kind of limits issue, this can allow the claim dollars to go further. So definitely something important to keep in mind. Okay, now I hope you remember what that silence means, but we're back and we're going to keep moving here in about 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. And continuing right along, let's talk about warranties. So one of the things that your insured might tell you is that if you have restoration done, there are a lot that will void their warranty on the electronics items. And the reality is, and again, this is all about education and things that you can convey to the policyholder, is that the loss is what nullifies the warranty, not any kind of restoration. And again, we talked about what if you're still making payments, but the key here is to really understand what a warranty covers. So typically, your standard warranty that's out there is really only going to cover one thing, and that one thing is product defects. So not misuse or accidental damage. There are some situations where the policyholder might have purchased some extended warranty that might cover peril. In these rare cases, you would need to have the insured contact the extended warranty company. But again, keep in mind that these are very far and few between. So even if you just took this away from today's training, hopefully you'll feel more comfortable addressing that warranty concern that you might get from a policyholder. So what about professional electronic restoration companies? What kind of warranty might they offer? Well, again, you only want to deal with the best, and you only want to deal with the most reputable. And those that are qualified to do this type of work will offer you a guarantee on the work that's done. And usually those guarantees range either 30, 60, or 90 days from the date of delivery. Now, that's important. And what this means is that if the item fails for whatever reason during that time frame, you'll be issued a full refund for the restoration costs of that item. And these items are tested again and again. They're tested on the front end to even see if they're a candidate for restoration, and they're actually tested a multitude of times throughout the process, with that final testing being the most extensive, so that when that delivery is made, there is an extremely high degree of confidence that the item is in fact restored and reliable. Next, we're going to talk about damage and the different types of cleaning options. And one of the things that I want you to know here is that when it comes to water damage, obviously do not test an electronic item until it's been checked by a professional. And one of the reasons for this is that the item could be wet or damaged on the inside, and you're just not able to see it. And if that's the case, by trying to test it, if there's any moisture in there whatsoever, can create a short and take something that could have been restored and immediately put it on the non-restorable list. And obviously, we want to reduce any chance of secondary damage happening. So you want to make sure that the power is turned off, that the equipment is unplugged, and that if there's batteries in there, especially a computer battery, that's removed. So again, an expert in electronics restoration can help guide you through this process. So let's talk for a moment about corrosion. Can this item be restored? And one of the great things that you're going to learn here is you'll learn how to identify it all by yourself on whether or not it can be restored just by looking at the color of the corrosion. So the key here is that if it's white corrosion, you still have a chance at restoration. But if it's blue or green, that means that power was running to the circuit board when it was wet, and that created a short, and that item is 100% non-restorable. So these are all things to look for. And sometimes it's really, really hard to see. So this happens to be a video game drive, and some of these can get to be very expensive. And if you look really, really closely, you can see some white corrosion. But again, that's good news, because that means that if this item is a candidate for restoration, so can it be restored, number one? and then should it be restored? And that's determined by the value of the item compared with the cost of restoration. And then obviously you've got the third component, which is adjuster direction. But again, going back to the color, if you see it the way it is right here, and it's that white color and not green and not blue, there is a chance that it can be restored. So the other thing to look for on these items is, in addition to bluish green corrosion, if you see any rust, clear sign that that item is non-restorable. But think about rust for a minute. That does not form in an instant. And truth be told, either does the bluish or green corrosion. So this does speak to the response time. So whoever you're working with out there, just like everything else that we do, time is of the essence. So the more quickly you can get an expert out there, the more effectively they can make an assessment, provide a recommendation, and increase the chance of restoration on that loss. Let's look at a couple before and after pictures so you can see on the left what happened as a result of the loss. You can see how beautiful it comes out the other side. Same thing here when you have all kinds of, this happened to be damage from sheetrock debris, so it could be a result of sheetrock breaking during the loss. Sometimes you have secondary damage that comes from the rebuild. This is something to consider because maybe you're going to have some construction done in a particular room. Those items need to be protected so that you don't have something like what you're seeing on the screen right now. And again, with the right approach, you can take items that look like what you see here on the left-hand side and make them into something like what you see on the right-hand side. Because of this, many of these items come back in just fantastic condition, in some ways even better condition than they were before the loss. So let's look at soot and electronics. And really a lot of this has kind of the same components of what we talked about with regard to water. The soot over time can become corrosive. So it just, again, speaks to the fact that that the clock is ticking from the moment that loss happens. So the more quickly you can get your experts involved, the better. The other thing to think about is that many of these devices, even in the absence of a loss, have fans. And what do these fans do? They are constantly running when the device is on. And when they're running, they're pulling in all kinds of dust and debris. And that's why when you look at that other picture that we showed, in many, many ways, when these items are restored, all of that dust and debris is removed. And because of that, we've in many ways extended the life of many of these electronics. And for that reason, again, you have a fantastic result just by engaging restoration. But one of the hardest things that you can do is to get buy-in from the insured. So that's what I want to talk about right now. And we're really, yourself and the partners that you use on a given claim are completely in the same boat, and you're fighting against preconceived notions that maybe are inaccurate. I can't tell you how many times back when I used to travel before the world changed, I would get an Uber ride to the airport, and sometimes the driver would say, "Hey, what do you do?" And I would tell him, I work in the claims business, and we do restoration work. We do contents restoration and textile and electronics restoration. And they would say, "Oh gosh, you know what? If I had a loss, I just want to check. I just want to check." And they don't understand it. These are people that have never been through a loss. They probably have never read their policy, and they don't understand a couple things. They don't understand that you need to seek first restoration as a way to settle that loss. And number two, many of them don't understand the concept of depreciation. So this is where, from the first day of that claim, you and your service providers need to be joined at the hip as it relates to messaging. And what you're about to see here, I hope will help you in the messaging to help get some, and I don't even like the term buy-in, but to get them to really understand that the course of action that you're proposing truly is the best course of action for their benefit, and that it's not just about dollars and cents. So as we look at this, they may not understand that electronics can be cleaned. So one of the best ways for you to convince them that they can is to use a visual example. And that visual example is in just about everyone's home. And you need to look really no further than opening that oven. So if you open up your average oven in any household, even my household, you wouldn't replace an oven when it gets greasy, or if you ever burnt anything in the oven. Why would you? These can be cleaned. Every once in a while, my wife and I will do a spring cleaning. And part of that is not just, me cleaning out the garage, but sometimes she'll clean the oven and she'll turn what looks like this into something that looks like this. And it's beautiful and it works wonderfully, and it will continue to work wonderfully, because that's all it is. Much like the char on the inside of that oven, that's what we're dealing with many times on these electronics items. And they can be cleaned just as beautifully as you can clean the oven. You just need the right partner who uses the right approach and the right solvents and the right tools, and above all else, communicates effectively so that everybody understands what's happening, why are you doing it, what the next steps are. So I hope that helps a little bit, because again, I think it's the more we can relate these types of things in analogies and relatable ways to the policyholder, the better chance we'll have of reaching a true understanding with them and helping them feel like they're a part of the solution. So we'll look at just a couple other before and afters here. And again, the key here is, as the adjuster, you are the leader on that claim. And you need to know in your heart that what you're telling them is the right way. And that's why I like that oven analogy, because if you're like me at all, that is a very relatable example to share with them. And it just like anything else, unless you're convinced yourself that restoration works, you'll never be able to convince them that it works. So using examples like that are fantastic ways to do this. You need to, obviously the key is to address any fears or doubts or concerns that they have about the restoration process. And even if you don't use that example, think of your own example. Think of what you have in your home and what you would want back. Or maybe, as I sit here now, and I don't even have a slide on it, I think about our washer and dryer. Again, we have 3 kids, 2 daughters at 9 and 8, and then a son who's 6. We accumulate a whole lot of laundry in our house. And you better believe that if we had a kitchen fire, and if it affected multiple rooms in our house, and our laundry room's not far from the kitchen, those are items we would want restored. And the sooner, the better. So if you think, you actually don't have to think too long to be able to come up with a good example that you can use to relate the importance of this to your policyholder. So just like anything else, you're leading that claim. You want to be fair but firm and provide that direction using your experience to help make them feel comfortable. So let's talk for a minute about the restoration process itself. So when it comes to this, again, you look at everything and you say, is it a candidate for restoration or not? And we'll talk about the inventory process in a minute. But assuming that it is, all restoration processes are not the same. It really depends on the extent of the damage. And the amount of restoration that needs to take place is directly related to the extent of the damage on a given item. So if you have light damage, maybe all you need is plug-in, testing, external clean, HEPA-Vac, deodorized post-test and storage. But if that damage gets more severe, you might go to a level 2. And let me show you what that looks like here. I'm going to turn down the volume on my computer. I don't want to blow you away here with the volume. But what you're looking at here is a level 2. So all we did in this case, again, it's a candidate for restoration. It makes sense to restore. So we went through the inventory process. It can be restored. Value of the item justifies the cost of restoration. So we have disassembly and a HEPA vac inside the equipment itself. I'm going to see if I can advance this because I'm not going to play the entire video. But in addition to that, we use a brush agitator, and we use specialized sprays that they do not leave any residue at all. And these items come out the other end of the restoration process in fantastic condition. Now, you may have a loss where the damage is even more significant. And in that case, electronics restoration specialist will engage a level 3 cleaning. And that's what you're seeing here. The first step is to use very specialized sprays. So in this spray, it is a deionized liquid that is combined with specialized detergents. And I'm going to see if I can advance that a little bit. Again, brush agitation to make sure that any residual particles are removed. I'm going to go a little further. This next step here is a clean deionized spray. So this does not include the detergents and cleaning agents that were in the first spray. This is just clean deionized water, and that is the key. The deionized water does not have any particles in it whatsoever. The fourth step here is to use pressurized air. After that, they go into the heat drying chamber, then reassembly, and then extensive testing before they go to final packaging where they're ready for delivery. So following, or actually I should say, what precedes the restoration process itself is the inventory process. And this might be, aside from being able to do the work effectively, this might be one of the most important parts of the process for qualified electronics restoration specialists, is the inventory system that they use. And the reason for this is that you always want to make sure that the items that are being restored should be restored. So with the proper inventory system, the technician can enter in this case, a 60-inch projection television that needs a level 3 cleaning, and the system will compare replacement cost with restoration cost and immediately tell the technician that if it doesn't make financial sense, it shouldn't be considered for restoration. And that's what that big alert is right there, is it tells the technician not cost effective. Now, what's important to know here is that a qualified electronics restoration specialist will never waste time or money restoring something that shouldn't be restored. But in addition to that, they'll still have a record that this item existed and it was damaged by the peril. Because even though it's not being restored, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have any monetary value, but that would be for you on a separate list to work out with the policyholder. So these are just different systems and tools that are put in place to make sure that the right decisions are being made or the right guidance is being provided by the specialist every single time. So on the flip side of that, here we have a Dell Inspiron 23 that's being put into the inventory system. Model number, serial number, and then here you look at your bottom line numbers with a replacement cost of $728 and a restoration charge of $44.17. You can see that the numbers work out well here. It makes sense to restore. So in this case, unlike the other example, in this case, we would recommend this particular item for restoration because it makes financial sense all day long. And that is the key, is having this type of balanced approach to restoration. And while today we're talking about electronics restoration, it's really this type of approach that makes sense in all types of restoration. So here we're looking at high-level numbers on the estimate that you'll receive from a qualified electronics restoration service provider and what you should be receiving. Obviously, you have your high-level numbers, so almost $17,000 to replace everything if that was what the adjuster wanted to do on this claim, or a restoration charge of about $5,100. So a pretty huge cost savings there. But it doesn't stop at that point. An adjuster should be receiving a detailed manifest with all of the line items that make up those high-level numbers, so that if the adjuster so chooses, you can go through line by line to check the work and to see the methodology behind all of the items that are being considered. So in this case, you've got a set of floor speakers, model number, serial number, replacement cost of $1,100, restoration charge of $77.14. So again, you can see very quickly here, the right thought process is going in to this. The right recommendations are being made for the right reasons. You have the documentation as an adjuster to support the direction that you want this claim to go. And when you have all of those elements combined, you are now that much closer at achieving the goal of cost containment and customer satisfaction all at the same time. So again, always looking, does it make sense to restore? And it's always for a variety of different reasons. Let's talk about non-restorable items for a minute. You're going to have these, obviously, but a good service provider is always going to provide you with the detail on what it was, model number, serial number, and then that way you can make a determination on what it's worth and what the proper settlement should be. One of the things that we run into, sometimes we'll get the question of, hey, can't you just tell me from the loss site what you guys should be doing? And the reality is that it's very hard for an electronics restoration specialist to be able to make an effective determination on what should and shouldn't be restored from the loss site, especially when you have an example like this, where a lot of times you have really, really bad lighting, you have a really chaotic environment. You may have items that are covered in soot or insulation, sheetrock dust. So it really makes a whole lot more sense to have the specialist remove the items and make that assessment in a controlled environment. So who's responsible for creating that inventory? Who's responsible for capturing the make and model and serial number? Well, we know that a qualified electronics restoration service provider is capable of doing all that. We just need the adjuster to provide that direction. Okay, last main topic before we get to our chat. Let's talk about data recovery. And I'm just looking at the clock here, and we're doing great. We've got just about 9 minutes, which is more than enough time. So the reality is that data recovery can be a huge benefit for a whole number of different reasons. Anything with a hard drive can potentially be a candidate for data recovery. And why is it potentially such a big opportunity? Well, the reality is that 26% of people back up their data once a year. 16% do it once a year or even less frequently. 21% of people never do it, which means 63% of the time you could have a situation where you have a pretty significant need for some level of data recovery. And it's a very cost-effective, but yet very beneficial service that a qualified electronics restoration service provider is able to provide for you. So with that, I'm going to launch our last poll question here. All right, poll number 2 is coming up. So please take a look at your screen. It says, what percentage of Americans back up their systems daily? 40%, 9%, 16%, or 63%? Looks good. We're at about we'll let this go for another 15 seconds or so. We've got 94 people that have answered this poll, so I'm glad to see the poll is working correctly. All right, and this is just another way that the Credentialing Bureau makes sure that you're paying attention. So thank you all for answering that. Okay, looks good, and we'll share the results here. And I'm just looking at the clock here, so I want to keep it moving. we'll talk now just a couple more things on data recovery. You might have a situation where you have a computer that is not cost effective to restore. And I can tell you, we've got one just like this. And it wasn't until really not long ago that I backed up that hard drive. But no one ever expects to have a loss. So what if the loss damages that computer and there are pictures on it? And maybe it's a picture from 1979. You might wonder how I know that. I know that because that's me and that's my dad from when I was just a little kid. And maybe it also has a picture of that same dad. Now he's a grandpa, and that's my daughter, Madison, right there. For me personally, I only backed up the data on this computer just recently. And it's because I do these trainings, I'm thinking I better practice what I preach here. So I went and I purchased one of those annual subscriptions to a cloud backup. But what if it's like so many of those people out there that have these pictures on their computer that they don't, and they haven't backed it up? Being able to get them these pictures back, that might just be the one thing that means the world to them. So knowing that you have that service to offer in your back pocket can just be, it can just be huge. So remember what the silence means. And I'll let this go for another 15 seconds. All right, so moving right along, very last thing we'll talk about are lightning strikes and surges, and these can be a problem, and it's something that can be a fairly high volume occurrence out there. So a couple things to keep in mind. There are no rules for lightning. It goes where it wants, and it doesn't always affect every part of the house. It will usually follow metal, no surprise there. So your gutters and chimneys, it will follow wires, so cable and phone lines and HDMI cables. The strength and the pattern of the strike or the surge can have a lot to do with how extensive the damage may be, as well as how close that home or that apartment or whatever it may be, if it's a renter's policy, is to the source. And electricity is weird. Again, it can jump rooms. But one of the things that is so important to keep in mind, obviously, you don't want to be in a situation where you're blindly writing a check for everything in the house. It's not sensible, and it's not the right way to approach that claim. So if you're going to have an expert come out to make an assessment on what's damaged, the key is to have them test everything. This way, when that expert leaves that lost site, you have a full, comprehensive understanding of what the risk is, what the extent of the damage is, and what the right next steps are going to be. As opposed to maybe another situation where only certain items were tested, and now you get that phone call that says, well, what about this, or what about that, or this or that isn't working, and now you're in a situation where you need to send somebody out again. So again, as long as you use the right specialist out there, they're going to know this. And if you haven't worked with electronics restoration specialists a lot in the past, a good one is going to advise this. And they know to run these items through a cycle. They know to turn burners off, obviously, if it's appliances like that. In addition, you can get a lot from just a visual inspection, and this is something you can even advise your policyholder to do. Look for signs of burnt outlets, burnt outlet prongs. Sometimes, and again, this is more for a specialist, but when you open it up, you can see whether or not it has visual damage. So in this case, this is a zoomed in shot of the circuit board here, but those two little marks right there on that circuit board, that is a result of a lightning strike. And then depending on the item, you could have some appliances that are thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So in that situation, does it make sense to have an assessment done? Absolutely. But you may even take it a step further. So let's say there is some visible damage. If that's the case, restoration is not going to be an option, but repair could be something to consider. Now, repair tends to be a different service, but again, most electronics restoration specialists will have some kind of go-to resource for that. And whether or not you actually move forward with the repair, it really just depends on what your company guidelines are and what the value of the item is, and then you make an independent decision. So when do you engage repair? It really comes down to what's your number, and at what replacement cost does that make sense to you? But it certainly can be an option out there. So congratulations, you guys. You've made it through the training. If you wrote down the codes, if you participated in the polls, you all need to do nothing more than look for that link from the job forms and fill that out, get it back to us within that 5-day guideline. Let's look at the chat. Mitchell, do I have to take you off mute, or can you unmute yourself?
Nope, I got it. I'm all set. A lot of great questions in chat. I'm pretty sure that they all were answered. Okay. But we usually leave it open for a little bit to see if people want to stay on and pop a couple more questions in there. But had some great questions about replacing parts, like you just answered it. So pretty much everything everyone asked, I said Chris is about to answer that. So
oh, that's great. Thank you, Mitchell.
Great job.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, just to kind of bring it all home here, when it comes to electronics, we spend a lot of money on it, usually high dollar purchases. You really want to be cognizant of the fact that if you're having any kind of construction done in the house, you want to minimize any chance of secondary damage. Get a specialist out there to make sure those items are protected or removed from the environment. Soot and water can cause corrosion, so definitely look for those colors. Remember, green or bluish corrosion, non-restorable. White, it could be a candidate for restoration. And then data recovery is a huge, huge benefit if and when it's needed. So just remember to keep an eye out for the JOT forms there. Mitchell, I saw a couple things flash up on the chat. Anything come in from
someone just we got someone asking for a copy of the PowerPoint, and I told them that we could get them some key slides and key materials, so we will follow up with them. Had one person that's was worried that the codes were different numerals, and I verified that they were different digits, so we're all set there. But other than that, we did have someone that missed the first code, and I'll just let them know that we'll communicate directly with them when you just need to do a software check to verify their attendance and things like that.
Well, that sounds really good. And again, Mitchell, Frank, Doug, Steve, and I will hang out for a minute. And before you go, just keep in mind, again, thank you everybody for attending. We really do appreciate it. And we're really so honored to be able to have you here and get you the credit that you need. So just remember that here at First Team, we do textile and electronics restoration in-house across the country. So if no matter where you are, everything you talked about, the methodology, the inventory system, the processes in place, all of that is consistent. So I know I'm a little biased, but I think we've got the best operators in the country in the business. So I really do hope we get a chance to work with you. And my contact info is up there at the bottom. Again, Chris Klein, you'll see my email and my phone number. So we're always here to help. And of course, we've got an 866 number, and just go to firstteam.com and you can get a wealth of information there. So really appreciate everybody attending. Mitchell, any final comments before we wrap up for the day here?
Nope. We do have someone that's saying that their work computer will allow them to access the JOT form and do that. I think that what we've always done, Chris, how do we handle that if someone needs to email to get the form?
So all the more reason, write down the information you see up there. You can email myself, Doug, or Steve, and we can help you. I'm hoping that's a one-off and more of an exception than
it does look like one person. So
yeah.
I think
yeah, please just send me an email and we'll be happy to help you.
Other than
Okay.
that, it looks like we're pretty good.
Hey, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap for the day. Thank you to my panelists and thank you to all the attendees out there. Just be on the lookout for more virtual CE trainings. We run these all the time on a variety of great topics. So if you need more credit and you need more education, look no further than First Team. And thank you again for attending today. Have a great rest of the afternoon.